So this week we have the Parsha of Tetze, depending on what accent you use. And it contains the most number of mitzvot of any Torah portion. And as such, we sometimes get confused about what the takeaway message should be of mitzvot, because we can detect within them contradictions or cross currents. And that's what I want to talk about, because when people feel cross currents, they lose vitality. And the title of this class is Spiritual Vitality, so that we can see through the confusion or the weight or the heaviness of many, many mitzvot, and we can at least see a proper direction or focus in life, which would give us vitality and give us bounce and give us a sense of spring in our step as we go out to fulfill the positive commandments of the Torah and to avoid transgressing the negative commandments of the Torah. And I want to begin with actually it's two mitzvot. It's on page 1054, 1055 in the Stone Chumash. It's in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 23, and it's sentences 8 and 9. And although it's often translated differently, the correct translation is, "You shall not reject the Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not reject an Egyptian, for you are a sojourner in his land." Famous phrase there, "Ki ger hayita bi'artza." We were gerim, we were strangers, we were guests in his land. "Children who are born to them in the third generation may enter the congregation of Hashem." So there's a technical aspect to this, which is that unlike converts that come from other peoples who immediately are absorbed into the Jewish people, a convert from the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esau, or a convert from the nation of Mitzrayim could only marry freely amongst the Jewish people once 3 generations go by. And as the halacha states, for example, if a pregnant woman were to convert, she's generation 1, her child would be generation 2, and her grandchild would be free to marry anyone else. They have full Jewish status from the moment they convert to Judaism, but there are restrictions in terms of who they can marry. They have to marry people similar to themselves who have this somewhat restricted status, and then eventually they become filtered into the Jewish people, unlike other nations. What do we see from this? So the common take on this is that the Torah, which requires of us to remember that we were enslaved in Egypt, to remember the details of oppression, to remember the fact that Jewish babies were thrown into the Nile River, at the same time doesn't want us to have an abiding hatred, vengefulness, or rejection of those descendants of the Egyptian people, especially when they join the Jewish people, and in general. In other words, there's no mitzvah in the Torah, there's no to gain retribution against the people of Egypt, in spite of the fact that we were so oppressed there and so enslaved there for 400 years, 210 years, based on what count you do. The fact that there was an attempt at real genocide of the Jewish people to eliminate us from the history of mankind. We're required to remember our experience in Egypt, but to remember it in a very specific way, that we become more sensitive to the stranger and to the orphan and to the widow and to the oppressed. And we're required to remember the bitterness of slavery, not so that we could arm ourselves to take revenge against that particular people that happened to enslave us, but rather so that we can become super sensitive to the needs of those people who require our assistance and our help. So this is the balance that the Torah wants from us. Now, it is interesting, and I can't help but mention at the very end of Parshat Ki Tetze this week, you will read that we're required to remember what Amalek did when they attacked the Jewish people, and that we have an eternal war with Amalek. And clearly the Torah is differentiating Amalek from all other peoples of the world. We're not going to discuss that requirement today, but the message here with Mitzrayim, with the way we are to treat the descendants, the people who come from, who are descendants of the very Egyptians who did enslave us and did attempt to eliminate us from world history, is that we're to be favorably disposed. We're not to be rejecting of them. We're not to hold grudges against them. All the mitzvot that the Torah requires of us in dealing with one another, prohibiting hatred within one's heart, prohibiting slander against someone, prohibiting bringing up someone's past in a way that denigrates the person. All of those lofty requirements that require us to be sensitive and kind and thoughtful and welcoming, they apply to the Egyptian as well, albeit with the sense that there does require 3 generations before they're fully marriageable within the Jewish people. But in any event, we're not here to right past wrongs. And that's an unusual balance in the Torah. And I want to attach this idea to the idea of spiritual vitality. I mean, Rabbi Sachs, in a piece a number of years ago, says that nobody who's shaped by hatred is even free, because you're shackled by the past. You become just a tool to undo past grievances. And he says that's not living free. And it really lines up very well with the famous idea that Rabbi Twersky, rest in peace, Rabbi Dr. Twersky, was fond of saying, that if you harbor a grudge against another person, you're letting them live in your head rent-free. In other words, you're taking space up, which should be used positively, and you're letting them occupy that space in a negative, shadowing way, which encumbers your ability to fulfill the Torah. It encumbers your ability to have healthy, good relationships with people you care about. And hence it's an issue that the Torah wants to eliminate. And that's all included in this mitzvah of being accepting of the convert from Egypt, in spite of the past wrongs, in spite of the fact that when Pesach comes next year, we're going to recount how our lives were embittered. We're going to eat the bitter herbs. We're going to talk about the fact that we were oppressed, that we were worked, we were brought to the edge of spiritual annihilation, and Hashem had to rescue us from there. But the focus is on the rescuing and the freedom that we have today and the experience that we can now apply to other people as we show them kindness, as we show them compassion. And that's the takeaway we're to have, that the Torah wants us to have. And I want to connect this idea to the well-known Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. It's in chapter 4, Mishnah 2. And we learned there that a person should always run to perform even a light mitzvah, because one mitzvah leads to another. And the Mishnah also tells us that one should run away from even what's considered a light transgression, because even a light transgression can create within us a reverberation of doing wrong, which will lead us down a path of life, which will take us to places that we would never expect to be. And to illustrate this most dramatically, and this is relying on a discussion by Rabbi Shlomo Yonason Harris about, from last week's Torah reading, about how there's spiritual momentum. And from that, I want to talk about the idea of spiritual vitality tonight. But he says that if you look at a sentence in the Torah, and it's on page 1037 in the Art Scroll Chumash, and it's chapter 19, sentence 11. It's in the context of the Torah talking about the cities of refuge. And cities of refuge are meant for people who commit accidental homicide. There's an element of negligence. It's a small element, but there's an element of negligence. It's not a pure accident. And they're accountable, and they have to run to an Ir Miklat, into a city of refuge. They have to stay there for a given period of time. That's the Torah system. But then the Torah says in sentence 11, chapter 19, but if there will be a man who hates his fellow and ambushes him and rises up against him and strikes him mortally and he dies and he flees to one of these cities of refuge, then the elders shall send for him and take him out of the city of refuge, and they shall judge him for his crime. And if he's found guilty, he shall be put to death. Rashi, as the Medrash does, picks up on the idea that what do I need this introduction if there will be a man who hates his fellow and he ambushes him, rises up against him, and kills him? If I kill someone I don't hate, I also have committed a capital crime, and I'm also subject to the judgment of the Beis Din. So what is the Torah pointing out here? If there will be a situation where there's hatred. And Rashi comes back to this idea, and he says, just hating a fellow Jew and harboring hatred, even when it's justified, is a violation of the Torah. Because the mitzvah in Kedoshim in Leviticus, in the middle there, I think it's chapter 19, I'm not sure, that for a person to harbor hatred is a violation of the Torah. So Rashi says something astounding here, that the reason the Torah talks about murder in the context of me murdering a person, murdering someone that he harbors hatred for, is to teach us this very idea. You and I would think that hating a person, especially a person who's wronged me, is a small sin. After all, it's human nature. He wronged me. And I'm not a murderer. I'm not plotting against him. But I have to tell you, I don't like him. You know, when I see him walking down the street, or if I come in and he's sitting at table 20, I'm going to sit at table 10. I don't want to be associated with him. So what Rashi says here, the Torah is coding us, coding into this law, the warning that don't think even something as light as harboring a grudge and hatred against another person can't grow within you and take on a spiritual momentum that could even lead you to murder. Because again, we have the principle from Pirkei Avot, which tells us that run to fulfill a light commandment, something that's easy to do, something that's small and minor, because it'll create a positive spiritual vitality within you. And run away from even a small sin, and here Rashi's underscoring this idea of harboring hatred, because you never know where that will lead you, what road that will take you down, and it could even lead to you becoming a murderer, something that's beyond your conception now. And we get statements by the rabbis that the Yetzer Hara is cunning. The evil inclination in a person doesn't say, go out and kill somebody. What's described is how festering negative emotions take on momentum within the person, sap the spiritual positivity and vitality of a person, and could lead to murder. And of course, on the positive side, we have the opposite, that a person who runs to do a small kindness can end up becoming an extremely altruistic person who can save a society and who can come to the rescue of a generation, because he's created that kind of vitality and that kind of positive momentum within himself. But here's where there's a nuance that Rabbi Harris discusses, which requires some thinking. And it goes as follows. Because in fact, there's two messages that the rabbis give us. Number one is that a good deed brings on its heels another good deed, and a transgression brings on its heels another transgression, because that's human nature. That's the way things work. But there's a separate idea. And the separate idea is that schar mitzvah, the ultimate reward for doing a mitzvah, this is a different idea, is to fulfill another mitzvah. And the ultimate punishment for sinning, for breaching the Torah, will be breaching the Torah again. Now, what does that mean? That the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. So we see two approaches here, and I think they're both important to understand if we want to see ourselves as dynamic people, that we wake up in the morning and we know that we have many choices, many decisions, many roles we're going to play that day. And it's all going to be a question of what grips us the most. What, if, to use a famous, O. Henry story, where husband and wife, they wake up in the morning and one decides I'm going to be evil that day and the other one says I'll be good. Then the next day they switch roles. We don't do anything that dramatic, but we know that a day takes shape one event after another, after another, after another. And to the extent that we're embracing with a sense of vitality, I'm here to accomplish a lot of good today. I'm here to do good in the world. I'm here to make the world a better place, even if I transact my business, even as I make my profit. But I'm going to be careful to do it honestly. I'm going to be careful to uphold a sense of the dignity of the other people I'm dealing with. I'm not out to be the ruthless business person who everyone knows takes advantage of everyone else, but rather I see myself as part of a world in which, and this is where the idea of tikkun olam comes in. I want to see to it that things are uplifted. I want to see to it that things are better for everyone. I want to see the world becoming more harmonious. I want to see the fulfillment of all these ideals that the Torah places in front of us. And in order for me to do that, then one mitzvah rewards me with another. So what we see here, and by the way, this is the second paragraph of the Shema. When we say, and it will be, if you listen to the ways of Hashem, that the rains will fall in their season, and you will harvest, your harvest will be robust, and you will have a storehouse filled with grain. Maimonides is very troubled by a superficial understanding of this section of the Shema. And then it goes on, if you seek to violate and break the Torah, the rains will stop, the land will reject you, and you'll end up living outside the land of Israel as we do today. So Maimonides says, this is not a simplification of life. The idea is that by doing good, God will give you opportunity of leisure so you could study more Torah. Not too many people take advantage of that as they achieve wealth. They don't seem to allocate more time for doing altruistic things. Very few people do. But that's the goal, and that's what Maimonides says. And Maimonides reads into the Torah this very idea of schar mitzvah, that the rains will fall in their season and you will have plenty. So you will be in a good frame of mind, and you will think to yourself, just as Hashem takes care of me so well, I can benefit others. And by the same token, if I'm not benefiting others, if I'm living very selfishly, so then I'm going to end up outside the land, and I'm going to end up missing out on tremendous opportunities to make the world truly into a better place. That's the dynamic that we look at. But what's introduced with this idea of the reward for a mitzvah as a mitzvah is something that's very esoteric. And I want to mention it here, not that I fully understand it, but it's really introduced by two commentaries who were struck by this idea that the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah. And it goes as follows, that when a person fulfills a mitzvah, and especially if a person fulfills a mitzvah joyously and happily and embraces the performance of doing good, so then that person from above receives like a special protection, a special alleviation of negativity. And Hashem, so to speak, says, if that's the way you're choosing to go, I will open a path for you, and it'll become easier for you. And I especially will take that nachat ruach, that enjoyment of doing good that you feel and express, and I'll magnify it within you. However, to the extent that a person knowingly, willfully says, I need shortcuts. I need to take care of number one. I need to do what's best for myself. Then, and a person wraps their attention, and that becomes what animates a person. So then, in the same sense, God says, okay, if that's the path you're going to take on, I'm not going to overly protect you. I'm not going to cause you to do bad. God doesn't do that. God didn't even do that with Pharaoh when he hardened his heart. That's not what God did. But by the same token, you're going to have less spiritual protection and less spiritual vitality coming from above, so to speak. And you'll be left more and more on your own devices. And as we can well imagine, that doesn't turn out so well. And I think a good example of this comes from the Torah reading 2 weeks ago. When we have the mitzvah of tzedakah, the Torah says, Poteach tiftach et yodecha. You should open your hand to the person in need. And Rashi gives a straightforward, simple explanation. Open your hand. In other words, if a person comes to you in need once, you open your hand and you provide them tzedakah, their need, whatever it is. It could be a smile. It could be encouragement. It could be financial assistance. It could be any one of myriad ways in which a person can fulfill tzedakah in doing good for another person. And if he comes back to you again the next day and still is in need, open your hand again and fulfill that need. That's what Rashi says. But here again, the Gra, the Vilna Gaon says, understand something. Open your hand to that person in need. Potoyach, open your hand. And then tiftach, the second time you're opening your hand, it'll be easier. And of course, it's especially easy when a person feels a sense of joy and accomplishment. I've helped somebody else. I provided for someone else's needs. Thank God I'm not only able to provide for myself and my family as I'm responsible to do, but I even have excess and an opportunity to provide for others. And I enjoy that. I feel a sense of satisfaction. I feel a sense of tikkun olam, that I'm involved in making the world into a better place. And as that happens, patoach tiftach, then the next time, God has built your giving muscles within you, and that becomes second nature and it becomes a part of who you are. And I want to use a remote example to point this out. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, is known in Jewish history. Her legacy, her moniker, is Sarah Imenu, Sarah the matriarch. And indeed, she was the mother of Isaac, and Isaac was the mother of Jacob. And from these people, from these couples, come the entire legacy of the Jewish people and everything that we bequeath to the world throughout history. But if you look at Sarah's life, the life of Sarah, the wife, the matriarch, the wife of Abraham, you'll see that she was 90 years old when she had her one and only child. And she died at the age of 127. So even a quarter of her life wasn't spent as being a mother. So why do we call her Sarah the matriarch, the mother? And the answer given by the rabbis is because from the time she was a little girl, she had the sense of wanting to do good for others, wanting to bring life into the world, wanting to enrich and nourish and build up a world, which is all part of what motherhood includes. So it wasn't just from the age of 90 until 127 when she passed away that she was a mother. She was a mother every day of her life because of that sense of seeing within herself the opportunity to nourish life and to reinforce life and to make life better. This is the attitude of spiritual vitality, of feeling nachat ruach, of feeling a sense of inner nachas, that we're able to do good. We need to reinforce it. And of course, as the Torah tells us, given this framework and this attitude and this way of living, we don't have time to be mired in hatred of the Egyptian. We don't have the bandwidth to be thinking about, oh, this person's a descendant of an Egyptian. Could I exact some measure of revenge? Could I put this person down? What are you talking about? Whatever the halachic restrictions are in this person ultimately becoming one of the Jewish people. In the meantime, there's no sense of rejection. There's no sense of hatred. There's no sense of abhorrence, given the injustice that took place in the past, because we're too vital, we're too alive, we're too involved in fulfilling and building Hashem's world that we can't be mired by that. And of course, once a year on Pesach, and really throughout the year, remembering the suffering in Egypt, but remembering it in such a way that it evokes greater empathy and concern for others. Yes, that we do, because that gives us added vitality, added strength, and added life. And that's how the Torah sets forward for us. That's the uniqueness of the Jewish people, because to a tremendous extent throughout history, this is what we've done, this is what we've fulfilled, and this is the mark we've made on the world and the legacy that we leave for our children. Thank you.
Thank you.